The cornerstone of this group of video lessons is women's emancipation and the prominent role that the 20th century played in it. That is why I chose to quote Lessing when she says that it's all due to the time we live in. Because the time has to be ripe enough for things to happen, and that is why, before I introduce the writers I have chosen to analyze for this lecture, I want to underline that the 20th century is in fact the century that made it possible for women to actually begin to believe and enact a substantial growth towards emancipation. And for that, I would like to take a very brief look into what changed during this century as far as the perception of women and their role in society is concerned. To that effect, I believe that it's enough to point out that in 1999, therefore at the turn of the century and right before the beginning of the new millennium, Time magazine named Emily Pankhurst as one of the 100 most important people, stating that she shaped an idea of women for our time. She shook society into a new pattern from which there could be no going back. Emily Pankhurst was born in 1858 and she was the leader of the British suffragette movement. A fierce political activist, she was much criticized for the methods she and her fellow activists employed in the pursuit of the rights of women to vote. As the name of the movement clearly states, they fought for the right to vote for all women. The suffragettes soon became known for their somewhat violent methods, such as smashing shop windows, attacking police officers, and even setting fire to buildings or public property. Many of them were even sentenced to prison, where they staged long hunger strikes that turned at times into the torturous, forceful feeding of them. Some historians believe that their protests were not always effective. However, they did succeed in obtaining the right to vote for women. And in fact, in 1918, a law was passed in the UK granting all men over 21 and all women over 30 the right to vote. And in 1928, the right to vote was extended to all women over 21. Miss Pankhurst died just before this last law was passed. An important quote that I'd like to underline attributed to Miss Pankhurst is that, according to her, men make the moral code and they expect women to accept it. They have decided that it is entirely right and proper for women to fight, for men to fight for their liberties and their rights, but it is not right and proper for women to fight for theirs, and thus underlining the unequal stands for both sexes. This is more or less women's condition in Britain when Virginia Woolf was born in 1882, that of second-rate citizens. It is precisely against this state of things that she too fights with and through her writing. Miss Woolf is a renowned writer not only among women, however, or especially as a writer for women firmly engaged in the feminist cause. Miss Woolf was and is an esteemed intellectual despite her gender, which isn't always the case with female writers or public figures even today. The two works that I think most relevant to our purpose are Orlando, a novel published in 1928, and the second, A Room of One's Own, which is a two-part lecture she was asked to deliver at Newham College and at Girton College, the first two women colleges at Cambridge, in the fall of 1928, on women's literary production. The lectures were later published in the form of an essay in 1929. Orlando is a novel published with great success in 1928. Quite a peculiar novel at that. Its structure is apparently traditional, yet the plot encompasses over 400 years of British history and begins in 1588 with the protagonist, Orlando, who is a 16-year-old boy belonging to one of the most ancient aristocratic British families who is about to be introduced to Queen Elizabeth I. The Queen is so taken by him that she invites him to court. Orlando has a sensitive, poetic soul, and he dedicates his time to writing. He is, in fact, composing his lifetime poem, The Oak Tree. As the novel unfolds, we will see Orlando at this point under the reign of Charles II, who is assigned to an important diplomatic mission to Constantinople, thanks to which he is awarded with a dukedom. It is while in Turkey that Orlando becomes a woman, a sudden and unexpected change that doesn't disturb him or her at all, for she feels just as before, and it's just her gender that has changed. The scene that describes the drastic transformation from male to female is both poetic and abrupt, and is carried out by metaphors through the appearance of three ladies, chastity, purity, and modesty, who embody the attempts to conceal such an unsettling change in front of society. The sudden intrusion of Lady Truth, however, makes the previous three disappear, and the new true Orlando is revealed, fostering the idea that we normally possess features of both genders without even realizing it at times. There is no clear-cut difference, black or white. It is not her gender that is important to her, but what she is as a person. As Miss Wolfe says in her novel, for it was this mixture in her of man and woman, one being uppermost and then the other, that often gave her conduct an unexpected turn. The curious of her own sex would argue how, for example, if Orlando was a woman, did she never take more than 10 minutes to dress? And weren't her clothes chosen rather at random and sometimes weren't rather shabby? And then they would say, still she has none of the formality of a man or a man's love for power. At this point of the narration, Orlando buys female clothes and sails back to England. During the sea voyage that brings her home, as she is wearing for the first time female attire, she truly begins to grasp the deep meaning about a gender transformation. The ship captain's courtly behavior towards her brings finally home what's happened to her. And if she is appreciative of her new condition, enjoys being courted, and indulges in responding coyly, flirting with him while pampering her vanity, she nevertheless dislikes the limitations the social conventions force on women, such as being powerless and always in need of protection. She doesn't want to hold her tongue, and she enters in conflict with herself or himself. Moreover, having been a man previously, she can truly make practical comparison. Now she understands women thoroughly and grasps complete insight of both genders, knowing that she is quite privileged indeed, for the fulfilling awareness she experiences of being both female and male. Notwithstanding that upon returning to England, as she lands on English coast, the 18th century is over, and the 19th has just begun, Victorian England is permeated by an oppressive spirit. The industrial thrive is contradicted by a strict moral code of behavior. She learns that as a woman she has virtually no legal rights over her title, money, or property, and she is compelled to file a legal suit to get her money and assets back. Different though the sexes are, they intermix. In every human being a vacillation from one sex to the other takes place, and often it is only the clothes that keep the male and female likeness, while underneath the sex is the very opposite of what it is above. Of the complications and confusions which thus result everyone has had experience. But here we leave the general question and note only the odd effect it had in the particular case of Orlando herself. In the midst of all these changes, Orlando also realizes that her outlook of the world changes according to the clothes she is wearing. So she starts changing them according to her mood, and she comprehends that others' perceptions of people too are influenced by the clothes they are wearing, as if to say that people do in fact judge the book by its cover. Therefore, if she wants to wander freely in London streets at night, it is by donning men's clothes that she can go about undisturbed and avoid dangers. Thanks to her new gender, then, and with full awareness of the previous one, she is much more insightful than most. That is why Orlando is also a novel about androgyny, in which the author is clearly stating that gender is quality instilled culturally rather than a biological trait. Again, Miss Woolf's words: surely, since she's a woman, and a beautiful woman, and a woman in the prime of life, she will soon give over this pretense of writing and thinking and being at least to think of a gamekeeper. And as long as she thinks of a man, nobody objects to a woman thinking. And then she will write him a little note, and as long as she writes little notes, nobody objects to a woman writing either, and make an assignation for Sunday dusk. The same happens. Finally, the novel ends in 1928. Orlando has taken a husband during the Victorian age, merely because she wants to conform with society. But the description of their relationship underlines their total rejection of definite gender roles, stating that they are complex individuals that cannot be labeled one way or the other. Finally, the narrative structure gives greater importance to personal issues rather than political. However, if the protagonist's life issues and events are emphasized in the plot, the historical background is ever present. Orlando is a mock biography dedicated to Vita Sack West, with whom Woolf had a sentimental affair. But it is also, and perhaps foremost, a history of England and a history of developing English literature, as shown in the last chapter, in which the protagonist understands that everything is connected. Reality, age, and time have a subjective quality, while imagination is just as important as fact. It is in her mature age, and she finally absorbs that she is not fixed individual defined by one fact or event, by one single moment, but that it is through the continuity of experience and life, from beginning to end, that she lives fully and can be whole and not fragmented. The same happens with her poem, The Oak Tree. She starts writing it during the Elizabethan age, and her models are history and myths from classical poetry. But the quality and the themes of her work change with the shifts of time till she reaches her full ripeness as a writer, condensing and combining all she has learned and all that she has become during her long life. Not just one, but many individuals interconnected and blended together. We will close with Orlando's words and Miss Woolf's words. It is clothes that wear us, and not we them. We may make them take the mold of arm or breast, but they mold our hearts, our brain, our tongues to their liking.